Welcome to Real Booked with Lindsey and Bea, where we reflect on the parallels between bestsellers and blockbusters for laughs and social disruption. I'm Bea Jordan of BlueCouchLibrary.com, and I read the book.
And I'm Lindsey Howie of MyRelationshipWin.com, and I watched the movie.
Hi, this is Bea. Before we get started, I want to give a quick heads up to any people of color, especially Black people of color. We talk about representation and Eurocentric beauty standards a bit. If it's going to ruin your day to hear two white women work through processing something you never had the privilege of not knowing, you're going to want to skip out at about the 53-minute mark when we're just starting to talk about Marmee. To learn more about these things from someone who actually knows what they're talking about, I recommend Allie Henny. You can find her website, alliehenny.com, follow her on Facebook, and find her podcast, Combing the Roots. We will post links in the transcript. Hi, Lindsey.
Hey, Bea.
What did you watch this week?
This week I watched the Greta Gerwig 2019 adaptation of Little Women.
Cool. Well, it just so happens that I read the 1868 novel by Louisa May Alcott, Little Women.
Oh my god, it's almost like we planned it that way.
I know.
Oh god. Okay, so, overall, I didn't really have a very good frame of reference for when I was starting out kind of this movie. But I did like it. You know, it was pretty heartwarming. It's all about, family. A lot of it's straight up white nonsense. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, it's very much that. But also looking at it just for the entertainment value, I thought that this adaptation did a really good job of having a cohesive story arc and a strong female character. So that was kind of my overall take on it. How did you like the book, though?
Much more complicated feelings about the book, actually. So I had actually avoided the book as a 12-year-old version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a Christian school, and it was very much, you could tell which books were encouraged and discouraged based on their, moral value.
For sure.
I had a book called Little Women when I was learning how to be a woman, and it was heavily encouraged by the same people who discouraged books like Harry Potter because of witchcraft. I was like, no, not going anywhere near that. And so I still definitely, the issues that I had with the book were because I was reading it like my 12-year-old self would have read it. Right? Like this is how people expect me to behave and be in the world, this kind of little woman. And so it was sort of, no thank you. It was a whole lot of no thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. This specific adaptation was actually praised by a number of people because Gerwig went out of her way to make it so that it was less about marriage, right, and becoming a wife, and very much more about womanhood, and that can look a lot of different ways.
So I recognized that was also what was happening in the novel. Louisa May Alcott was not a strict, staunch conservative figure. She was very much liberal and very much believed in equality for women. White women.
Well, but the Alcott family, though, has a whole history with racism and the country developing, and so, I mean, I can't speak for her or that time period, obviously.
That's true. But it was progressive for its time period. It was 1868.
That was a really hard thing to actually place within the movie. They definitely referenced the war, right? But I had to go back after the fact and place it in the Civil War.
Yeah.
That was not something that it was readily apparent to me from the beginning. I knew that it was old-timey, obviously, but it's really hard to place when the actual storyline was taking place.
Right. So You had mentioned before when we talked briefly that there was a main character when it came to the movie, which there wasn't really in the book. We kind of, like, everybody identifies most with Jo, I think, including the author. But it was very much about the four of them.
So this adaptation was different in that you basically open the story with Jo, and it's a later year, like it's further on in the story when she's already in New York.
Yeah.
And so you kind of see from the beginning that this is going to be very much about her, and you can definitely tell that she is trying to make it in a man's world, especially how, you know, she's treated while she's in the publishing office, and how she reacts when she, you know, does make that sale of the article. So you can definitely see right away that, like, this is about her. She's becoming an author. You're going to be able to see that. And then it kind of flashes back and forth between, like, this is the now characters and this is their 7 years ago timeline.
Okay.
And so it really intermingles all of the sisters in those flashbacks, though. So I don't know, because I don't have a frame of reference for the story. I don't know how much of the flashback time was the individual storylines for the sisters kind of mingled together.
Yeah, so Little Women was actually published as 2 books. So in 1868, Louisa May Alcott published Little Women, and there's even a little blurb at the end, like, if it is received well in the public, I'll publish the other half.
Yeah.
And so it was a full novel up until the point that Meg was engaged.
Okay.
And the dad came back from the war, and Beth recovered from scarlet fever. And then the next novel was actually titled, not by Alcott, but by the publishing company, Good Wives. That's nice. And there was a 3-year time jump in between, and right after Good Wives, the second half of Little Women came out. That was when Jo moved to New York briefly, and Amy took off to go to Europe.
Okay. So in that, like, having that understanding, I think that Greta Gerwig did a really good job then marrying those 2 stories and being able to give you enough information about, you know, these characters in their individual selves and how they've gotten to where they are in their, you know, the real-time part of the movie, which is obviously the second book then that you're talking about.
That makes sense. The second half is a lot more linear and follows the characters in a more traditional story narrative. The first book is more, each chapter is its own little vignette.
Yeah, and this was very much a blended situation. So, like, from the beginning, you get kind of a snapshot of where each individual sister is at that time. But it's really funny because there's not very much depth to a lot of it, right? So, like, you get a lot of information about Jo. She's in New York. She's she's selling an article to a publisher. She's living at a boarding house. She's met Frederick. All of these things are happening right at the beginning.
Okay.
And you can tell that, like, she is in New York. She's working. She's trying to support her family. All of that is happening for Jo right now. And then you kind of flash over to Amy, who is in Europe, and she's working on her painting, so she's still in France. And she's, you know, doing the whole painting classes, and she's very much leaning into that specific, this is what I'm doing right now. And then you go back to Beth, who's just, like, playing a few chords on the piano, and then it suddenly shifts away from her, right? So, like, you get so much time with Jo, and then smaller amounts of time with each of them.
Yeah, that she's definitely the main focus. That makes sense. Jo is, even though she's not the typical main character, she's definitely, a lot happens around her character specifically. That makes sense because she's the stand-in for Louisa May Alcott. And she's the one who a lot of the sort of feminist ideology happens around her. She's trying to make it in a man's world. She expresses multiple times that she wishes she was a boy, which I think we need an adaptation in which Joe is a trans boy. I think that would be brilliant. I think that we've done enough of this one that we can move on to something a little bit more.
That was something that actually shocked me when I saw how many times this book has been adapted to film. And obviously it's like way too much for me to go through and watch those adaptations, but just to like know that this story resonates with people so deeply that they continue to do it over and over again, I think really speaks to the fact that there are themes that stay relevant no matter how much time passes.
Yes. I think it's so interesting. The themes around Jo herself are confused, I think.
Interesting.
Because we have this young woman, this little woman, who is trying to make it. She's trying to be a published author. That's always her goal. She expresses multiple times throughout the story she's not interested in marriage. She's not interested in romance. She's just not interested. Unless it's in a book, in which case she's all in. She is interested in furthering her career as an author and pushing herself to become a better author. That's where she is.
Yeah.
And she loves her family and wants to be there for them in whatever way that she can and should be. And also she is career focused. In real life, Louisa May Alcott, who Jo is based on, didn't marry and did end up, just publishing. Just like that was her gig. She did other stuff, but she wrote. That was her job. She was a spinster who wrote. And so I think that the themes around how Jo's drive to succeed are presented is really interesting, because we have this, after Beth dies, and after Jo comes home from New York and Beth dies, she is like gonna focus on being the new Beth of the family, and she's gonna be self-sacrificing, and she's gonna just take care of her parents, and she's not gonna write anymore because she wrote those sensational stories in New York, and that was terrible. It was very, very amoral for her to write stories like that. Poor Jo. So she tried to lean into that. And it was expressed that Frederick hated her stories in New York because they were sensational and amoral. And she was ashamed. She wrote under a pseudonym because she knew that her parents would not be okay with her writing those kinds of stories. Like, oh God, I wrote trashy fanfic. Don't tell mom and dad. So we get this sort of like, this is not the way to be. But then after she goes all into trying to be the new Beth, her parents are encouraging her to like go back up to your writing attic and put on your writing hat and go to it, because that's what you want to do. That's important to you. It just seems confused to me that this is a thing that she shouldn't do. She should focus on being domestic. But also this is a thing that she needs to do because she's a creator and she needs to create. And then she ends up putting it all to the side to get married in the book.
Okay.
Which is the part that's really interesting to me, because she didn't ever stop in real life.
That's interesting that you brought that up in that way. It makes me think about double standards and how double standards are just woven into womanhood. Because we are constantly compared to the supposed tos and the shoulds, right? Like, this is the model, and if you're deviating from this standard, or if you're refusing to check off these boxes that are a guideline for your femininity, then you're other and you deserve all of the side eye and all of the extra stuff that comes along with that. And again, that's one of the things that, like, I think that this movie specifically did a really good job addressing in a couple of different ways. One being Amy's storyline, actually. She's actually a pretty likable character, which is something that, I read some reviews and...
She's a brat. I don't dislike her, really, but she's a brat.
Well, I think that she was made that way on purpose. I think that, from a very young age, she was told that her job is to marry well. And in the book, in this adaptation of the book, Aunt March is basically telling her, like, it's your job to rescue your family. You have to grow up and marry well. Like, that was told to her at a very young, impressionable time, and she steps into that without any problem. And it goes on to basically say that, yes, marriage is, in fact, an agreement that has a lot to do with economics.
Mm-hmm.
And she has a couple of really good, speeches where one of them, she's really addressing Laurie directly, actually, and how he's impacted the whole entire scenario with her and her family. But the fact that she's able to say things like, if I were to be married, or when I am married, like, my children will be owned by him. If I have any money of my own, it will be his. Like, she has this whole monologue where she's really addressing things in a way that's like, these things are all true and they need to be said more. And I love that she has this awareness, and yet she still owns the fact that, yes, it's my job to go out here and find the most appropriate suitor so that all of my family can be well cared for.
Wow, that's really much less explicit in the book. It's not there. At one point, she almost agrees to become a Mrs. somebody whose name I can't remember, because he is wealthy and she likes him well enough and figures she can work with him. And so it's definitely there, but it's subtext.
Sure, and they made that part of the storyline in this adaptation, and I think it really helped to not just give Amy more dimension, right,
Mm-hmm.
and make her a full character so that, yes, she's a brat, but you see why, and for the sake of what, really, like, what the long-term goal is. But you also see her develop in her own personhood, in that, she met this guy when she was in the earlier years, right,
Mm-hmm.
And she told him up front, remember my name, because when I grow up, I'm going to come to Europe and find you. Lo and behold, when Aunt March invites her to France, that's part of Aunt March's grand scheme, I'm sure. She's a very plotting woman, I think.
Much less so in the book. I think in the book she was more content to just sort of scowl.
No, she definitely has a lot of facial expressions, for sure. But Aunt March definitely does not like Laurie. Like, she sees, like, the whole, that's gonna mess up, yeah. But this man that Amy was, like, pursuing is who, like, part of going to France. I'm going to learn how to paint. I'm going to get this guy I'm going to become engaged to this man. And therefore fulfill my destiny of taking care of my family by marrying rich. And people will really, really hate on women for doing things like this, and for owning their story, and for being able to connect those dots, and to actually see that this is true. Like, this is just human history. You can't rewrite it for the sake of making you feel better.
If you are a woman in the 1860s and you are concerned about the welfare of your family because they are poor, you have limited options to help them.
Today, if you want to marry well, you are thinking about your finances. And if that makes someone a quote-unquote gold digger, then so does marrying someone because they are beautiful and you find them physically attractive. This applies to both genders for the same but opposite reasons. And that's the part that, like, never ever gets addressed anywhere.
No, that's absolutely, like, yeah, that makes sense. That's not something that I've equated in my own head before, but it makes perfect sense. Yeah, why should it? Both of these things are for your own benefit. marrying someone because you appreciate how they look, marrying someone because you appreciate that they are wealthy. These are for your gain.
Different people derive value from different things.
Yeah.
That's 100% acceptable.
Yeah.
A marriage is still a contract between two people. It's still very much a status thing and a wealth thing, and that's just because it is a legitimate government contract. Like,
yeah.
That's just what it is.
It complicates it a lot, and I do appreciate that about Amy. As she got older, it became more apparent that she's not just the bratty younger sister. And, like, they make fun of her because she tries to be pretentious, but then she mispronounces French words and stuff. Because she tries really hard. Because everybody tells her, like, she's the baby and she's the one with the beautiful curly blonde hair. And, like, oh, she's the pretty one. She's the one has the best chance of marrying well. And everybody tells her that, and she knows that. And I think that it's a pretty common thing that I think a lot of people will identify with. The youngest of the family, the cutest, the one that everybody's like, oh,
yeah,
you're
the baby.
The baby. Of course she was a brat. You see her as she becomes more aware of what she feels is her responsibility to her family as she gets older. She is definitely not plotting for her own wealth. She specifically wants to take care of her family, and this is the avenue that is available to her. I think it's really interesting, and I think that's probably the more I'm reassessing my notes and learning more about the Alcott family, the more I really see why this book has stuck around the way it has, why people identify with it so much. There's a lot in the subtext about being a woman. Oh, there's a lot in the differences between Louisa's life and the life of her characters, where you can actually see the pressure from the publishing companies in her work that I think make it a little bit more morally coded and more domestically coded than I think she would initially have had it. Like, I don't think that Jo would have got married if she hadn't had any pressure to do so for her.
I know that she wouldn't, because in this adaptation she didn't.
I think that it's really funny that it reads to me a little bit like a middle finger from Alcott that the person that Jo ends up marrying is older, foreign, and ugly. Because I feel like she is saying to her publishers, like, okay, I have to have this girl, this, young, fresh, all-American girl marry someone. Well, she's going to marry an older German scholar, and he's not nice to look at. How do you like that?
I think that is so funny for two reasons. At the beginning of this adaptation, the publisher that Jo is selling her article to straight up tells her, if you write about a woman again, make sure that she is married or dead by the end. And Jo's like, and then he just steamrolls right over her, trying to clarify that you really just said that to me.
That feels really meta.
Yeah, for sure. But then also, Gerwig obviously put her spin on things, and so Frederick is not older or ugly. Scholar, yes. But so it's funny because at the close of the movie, when, Jo has gone through all of this grief with, obviously she has to transition through Meg's wedding and then going to New York, and there's a lot of things that are happening. But then when Amy comes back, she's married to Laurie, and Beth has just died. And so she's grieving on so many different levels personally.
Yeah.
That I really appreciated that this adaptation didn't just shove her into a marriage because of those reasons.
Yeah.
Because it would have been really easy to show her reconciling all of this in a way that led her to just stay home and, be Frederick's wife.
Yeah.
It could have very easily gone there and followed the book in that parallel. And instead, she didn't. Which is amazing, because you get to see Jo go through the process then of, yes, reconciling with Frederick, and that component was there, but it was not the main part of what was happening then. The main part of what was happening then was her getting validation from her publisher that women are responding to your work, and her going through the process of bringing the book into the world, and her going through the process of her opening her school. So it's like the perfect ending to a movie that is supposed to be about you, woman, are unique and can follow your own path, whatever that looks like for you, and come out the other end, even having gone through all of your trials and tribulations as the version of yourself that you want to be.
I really like the juxtaposition of that. You can, combined with the reality of, but it's going to be really hard and there's a lot of pressure for you to basically marry well.
Yes.
That's interesting. What about Meg?
Meg was a character for me that really didn't resonate. Mostly because there wasn't very much to what was happening with her. I didn't feel like there was enough emotional attachment for me to really be invested in her story. Mostly because she did take the standard traditional route of developing into wife and mother. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get to see very closely how that impacted her. So I felt like my relationship with Meg was a lot more superficial than either Jo or Amy, actually. Because really, she was the oldest. And so I think that puts a lot of pressure on her from the beginning to, do the socializing and finding the spouse and really following in more of a Marmee kind of role to model that for the younger ones is kind of how I saw that happening. So, like, the main conflict that I saw in Meg was when she bought silk that her family didn't have the money for, and there was the whole peer pressure component, and then obviously that caused turmoil within the relationship, and how do you reconcile that? The only other real, Meg components were we saw part of the wedding, and we saw when Beth was actually on her deathbed, John and Meg had a reconciliation component over the silk. Okay. And John was basically like, yes, stay here, care for your family, I've got the kids. So it was...
Interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. That is, yes, accurate.
That's a little bit disappointing to me. I feel like the role that I've taken in my life is I chose to get married fairly young and start having babies. I just had the one, but
right.
That's so. I really, again, I feel like there is societal pressure there, but also it's not an invalid choice.
No, and actually one of the things that I do like about Meg is one of her lines was to the concept that we all do have to figure that out for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it was, I remember, Jo was concerned because her older sister's getting married, and she's like, don't leave me, right? So it was this loss thing that Jo was feeling, and so Meg showed up for her, and she was like, well, first of all, you're not losing me. Second of all, this is a valid choice. We all have to figure out our own paths.
Yeah.
And so that, I don't think it was enough for me to really bond with Meg.
I didn't either in the book, but I do feel like there was potential around that character.
There's so much potential around that character. I mean, again, just being the oldest of 4 siblings, when you're talking about Civil War and what that means, from a social perspective, and then what your responsibility looks like to your family as that person. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be about societal pressure. If you just want, just is a stupid word. If you want a family and that's your primary focus when you are young, that's okay. I want a story where where Meg gets married and has babies and then starts a support group for young mothers because postpartum depression was touched on very briefly in the book. That's not what we called it, but Meg had postpartum depression. She basically was told to like brush her hair and get over it. And she did, and that worked for her, which, no, that's not how that works, guys. But no, I want to see a version where Meg starts a support group for young mothers and, you know, seeks help for her postpartum depression and finds her way, builds a community, and then when her kids get older, finds another passion to take up her time and her energy, something that she loves and cares about once her children don't need her as much. I want to see that story because I lived that story.
I think that that's a very relatable story, something that would resonate on a lot of different levels with a lot of different people, just because, first of all, postpartum depression and or depression at any phase during procreating and the immediate after effects. Yes, it happens to everyone at one point or another. It's just one of those things. Mm-hmm. And I'm really kind of disappointed at this point that was not part of the movie plotline, although I do understand that this is like feel-good version, not that story. However, if we don't start making space for that, where it's, you know, technically not supposed to belong, then we'll never make space for it.
So another thing with Meg, you talked briefly about her buying the silk, right? So the story was they had, I don't know, an exorbitant sum of money, say $25, that John needed a new coat, a new winter coat, and they had set aside that money for it. And she spent it on silk because she had a friend who peer pressured her. And it was very, you know, very disappointing. She was disappointed in herself. He was disappointed in her. He didn't like shout or anything. He was, you know, but it was all around uncomfortable. She messed up. She didn't know what to do about it. She ended up getting the peer pressure friends to buy the silk from her. And then she made up for this by, like, when her husband came home, she was wearing the coat. It was very fade to black, but the implication that I got was that she was just wearing the coat.
Interesting.
Yeah, I did think that was interesting, that was the way of apologizing and making it right. Again, not explicit because it was published in 1868, but it is implicit that she bought her way out of a confrontation with her husband with sex.
I mean, a lot of men have been conditioned to believe that sex stands in for an apology, so I don't think that this is too far off of how interactions go in marriage.
I don't think that it's too far off for that to be perceived as the appropriate way to do that. I do think it's worth mentioning that happened. That happens. Ladies, you don't owe anyone your body ever.
Yeah, what she said.
That's just another one of those things that I was like, did she just with the coat, and then we're just not going to talk about what happened after? I think I know what happened after, and then it's the next scene. It's like, oh, she's got twins.
That's what happened.
That's what happens. She's got twins.
Okay,
and
all right. I like that, actually.
Yeah.
You apologize with sex, and then you get twins. If that's not immoral, then
right.
I don't know what is.
And then it was the whole thing where she had, man, it looked like my postpartum anxiety, where she was just all over the babies all the time, which that makes sense. You've got two of them. And they're like 6 months old, which means they're starting to move around and put stuff in their mouths. And you're like trying to figure out how to be a human with two humans that are sustained from your body. That's a lot.
Well, and again, Civil War. So she's probably, what, 12? I mean,
I think
probably not. I hope she was more than 12. That was...
No, I think she's like, but still like 19 or something. She was, no, because she had a super long engagement for some reason. So I don't know, early 20s. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't
You're
matter.
right.
She was young and trying to figure out how to be a human and also a mother, and so yeah, she had all of her attention was on the babies all the time. And so her husband was like go and hang out at his friend's house who had recently got married and didn't have any kids, and so he had like a wife at home to make it nice for him. Yes, because that is a woman's job. And so Meg started wanting to see her husband more because the babies were getting a little bit older and he was still not around. And so rather than expressing that in any way, her marmee told her to just make her home so lovely and nice and inviting that he won't want to go away. So put on a nice dress, do your hair, and then sit next to the fireplace darning socks or something.
Just wait.
Yes.
Because that's obviously what he wants.
Just do everything perfectly and then wait for him to notice.
I mean, that's really, really bad advice for anyone wanting to develop a relationship or deepen a connection or increase intimacy, or really bad relationship advice there, Marmee.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, I feel like the character had a lot of space to grow and learn different things. There was a lot of pressure for her to be an 1868 wife, right? Which has certain implications that she was aware of and trying very hard to live up to. But man, even if you choose that, even if you choose to be the housewife, like you still have agency, you're still a whole person. That part wasn't really explored.
I don't think that personhood is explored when it comes to female characters. Mm-hmm. I think that you must fit your archetype and support whatever the main narrative is, and that's your whole role as a female character.
Yeah.
I think that that's more the case from Alcott's time than it is for right now. I know, obviously there's been so much change in society and the way that we're able to create female spaces. But those narratives are still there, even in modern conversation.
So yeah, I would have liked to see more development around her character in the book, and it sounds like in the movie as well. That would have been nice. I think there was a lot of space to explore things and give her a little bit more room to breathe and be a person.
Yes, there was definitely, they most assuredly could have at least given us more insight into the internal life of Meg.
Yeah.
At least given me more information about how she's moving through this.
Yeah.
And why she's moving through it this way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I understand, obviously, the basics of peer pressure, and I understand socioeconomics, and I know that it's really, really, really hard to put, your husband's and your children's needs ahead of your own. I get the things that she was going through, but I think that it was still superficial, and that if you don't give them the space to have depth, then you're really just...
We have this narrative about mothers that they are inherently self-sacrificing, that they even maybe don't have needs or wants outside of their families. Mm-hmm. And I think that Meg and Marmee both hold that up. They really exist for their families, and that is just harmful. We know that that's not true. Women are people. Women are people.
Women are people.
Even mothers.
Especially mothers. Yes, I mean, the whole concept of life is that motherhood is necessary. I don't know why we have to infantilize females because we're able to produce children. I don't. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
It's not a now discussion.
We'll come back to that later. Speaking of characters that are not really whole people.
Well, in connecting it to Marmee, right? Is that where you're going?
Actually, I was going to Beth.
Oh, okay. Cool. Let's do that first then, and we'll circle back, because same but different.
Yeah.
So, Beth is the cannon fodder character
Yeah.
in this movie, and you cannot make me see her differently because every chance that you get to learn something about Beth, you learn nothing about Beth.
There's nothing to learn about Beth in the book either. Beth exists to be a literal sainted angel on Earth, and she wants nothing. She strives for nothing.
Yep.
She pursues nothing, and she leaves nothing undone. The foreshadowing that she was going to die started in like chapter 3 of the first book, and she didn't end until 3/4 of the way through the second book, which is the second half of the book. So by the time she dies, I didn't even shed a tear. I was like,
Oh,
that took a long time.
Yeah.
It took a really long time, guys. All right. And I think that what happened to Beth is that she was based on Alcott's actual real life sister.
Okay.
It tends to be that when someone dies, we only talk about their good qualities, and that as a tribute to the real life Elizabeth, who is Lizzie in real life, Beth was perfect in every way. She was the sweetest, gentlest, kindest, bestest human. And that means that she didn't have any of the flesh, blood, and bone that made her a real character.
And in the movie, it's interesting because, like, her opening scene was her sitting, like, forlongingly at her piano. And it's, like, a 30-second shot. It's nothing. But, like, at that point, we don't know that she's, like, sick in...
Okay. Right.
In the end of her timeline. I don't know or have any frame of reference for these people yet. So it's literally just, like...
A girl sitting at the piano looking forlorn?
Yep. That's it before it moves on. And then all of her contributions to the scenes from 7 years ago. So from the first part of the book where, they're young and they're becoming themselves and they're figuring out how to navigate sisterhood and what that means for them. She's really just, like, there.
Yeah. She's in the background, knitting or dusting something or petting a kitten.
I mean, she took a more active role than that, in that, like, when they were putting on plays, she was participating. When Marmee was off helping father because he got injured and it was just the girls and they were supposed to be looking in on the poor family. And thank you. And, the other girls are just like, not today, Beth.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm going anyways. And the scarlet fever.
So that did happen in the book. She had some agency. She moved. It was just she was the most bland oatmeal character.
Yes. And she developed that weird relationship with Laurie's grandpa.
Yeah, she did. I'm glad that translated well to the screen.
Not well. I would not say well.
No, it was a bit odd and creepy.
It was very much like if this were genuinely Civil War era and I were observing this in real life, I would say that this is really pedophilic courting. I wouldn't call it that because it would be the Civil War and that would be normal. Sorry. Not sorry. But yeah, Beth is cannon fodder that may or may not have been in a relationship with a grandpa, and I don't know. And I'll never know, and that's fine.
That's fine. I don't need to know about that. It was meant to be, I think, sweet. It didn't read that way to me.
Daughter died, and there was a whole thing with her and the piano, and then Beth playing the piano, and, like, I understand what they were trying to do. It still came across as creepy.
Yeah. Well, and also... No, there's a thing about grief there, too, that probably needs to be discussed, because the grandpa was definitely, if there was no pedophilic creepiness there, he was, at the very least, treating Beth as a surrogate for the daughter that he lost, which that's not healthy, guys. And then after she died, the grandpa said to Joe, "You're my Beth now." Like, he said that explicitly in those words. "You're my Beth now." That's not how grief works, guys.
That is not how grief works.
You can't just it's not like your hamster died and you buy a new one. These are humans.
I mean, to me, that just speaks to, like, the male condition to not be aligned with feelings and understanding that internal emotional climate. Emotions, bad, man, grr.
I think that's, like, definitely toxic masculinity in that way of being unable to or choosing not to grieve. But that's not just a male thing either. I know that there's a lot of, like, with grief specifically, if I don't look at it, it can't hurt me.
Yes.
And yeah, that was definitely, like, that was the only thing that made the relationship between the grandpa and Beth seem less creepy and more really, really sad and damaged. Yeah. Was that he was just trying to pretend like nothing bad had happened to him, and he still had his sweet little piano playing daughter.
Okay. That didn't translate that way in this adaptation, mostly because the way that Gerwig framed it was that Beth actually approached Grandpa about using the piano, if that was going to be something that wouldn't be disruptive, or if no one would be able to hear her.
No, in the book it was like she was super, super painfully shy, and so they specifically set her up to kind of force her to approach the grandpa.
Okay.
No, actually, they didn't. They let her not approach him. He just explained loudly in her presence, like, to Marmee, that she could come over and play the piano at his house whenever she wanted, with no, she didn't have to come check in or talk to him or anything, that nobody would be in the room, and there would be, like...
Interesting. Okay.
So that she could just go do that, and then eventually he gave her a piano.
Yes, that did happen in the movie as well.
Because eventually they actually spoke and developed their whole pseudo grandfather-granddaughter relationship.
Yes.
That was a little
weird. It was definitely weird.
I thought that too. I'm glad I wasn't just being cynical, or if I was, it's both of us.
Exactly. No, that's perfect. Towards the end, after Beth had died, right? Grandpa was just, like, hanging out outside, and Joe's walking back from getting her letter, and there's this exchange between Grandpa and Joe's like, I'm not as good as my sister, but if you ever just need the company, I can just come over and play for you. I mean, not verbatim, but basically, I'm willing to do that for you too.
Which is, I think, a nod to how he was very much like, "Joe, you're my Beth now. Because I can't have this hole in my heart. Yes. I need somebody to fill it because I can't deal with this grief."
I just think it's funny that, like, he was direct about that in the book, and in the movie, they adapted that so that, like, Joe sees that he is grieving Beth, and she connects that he is still grieving his daughter, and she's like, "I can do this for you."
Right.
Which, again, I think is something that, as women, we are very much conditioned to do. I see you're hurting. How can I help? This is something that I can offer. This is...
Which is, yeah, definitely... It makes more sense the way they did it. It sounds like it makes more sense the way they did it in the movie. Because, yeah, I could definitely see, like, a lonely old person who had developed a relationship with somebody who has died now. Yeah, sure, I'll come play the piano for you. Like, you're literally next door to me. That's not much of a inconvenience. That's fine. But saying, you have to be this person for me now, that's That's not healthy.
No, and what I don't like is that it still covers up the fact that this guy is grieving and he hasn't done anything to process that, and now he's just got more heaping on top of it because he's not processing it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like Joe is enabling his inability to align with his feelings and genuinely grieve because, oh, I'll just pop in and play piano for you when you get sad. That's not helpful. I mean, I know it sounds nice.
It's hard.
And I'm not saying don't show up for people that need your help. I'm saying that, like, you can't just stuff shit down and put music over top of it.
You have to deal with it. It hurts. Deal with it.
Deal with the hurt.
Yeah.
God. Yeah. So as far as, like, interesting to least interesting, for me, it was definitely Joe, Amy, Meg, Beth.
Yeah, Beth, the only interesting things were the people maneuvering around her, which is why you call her cannon fodder. That makes sense.
I do. I keep saying that because she doesn't have any depth. It's literally she exists to die. If that is not cannon fodder, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I understand, like, I can see now that you're talking about the morality component and how she is sainted in the book, how her behavior does align with that, but having no reference for that as I'm watching the movie, it's just like, she's a nice kid. She just doesn't have, I don't know, she is passionate about her music, but she does not want to pursue music the way that Amy wants to be the greatest painter, or the way that Joe is committed to writing.
Right. No, she literally only wants to exist in her home with her parents and her sisters, taking care of everybody.
Yes.
Like, in her small ways where she goes around and cleans up after everybody without them noticing.
Which is why it's very likely that the point that you made about Beth and Lizzie being parallel is the case, because you can't develop a character past what you know of the character.
Well, Lizzie, Alcott's real life sister who died, was actually a whole person. She was older than Beth. She had got married and had a child. Alcott, Louisa May Alcott, actually raised her child after she died.
Interesting.
Yeah. According to a very, very quick Wikipedia search. So, these are not fact-checked.
Buyer beware.
If this needs to be updated, it will be so. So, I'll check into that in post. But yeah, she was a whole person. It was just, I think that Beth is just the only the good parts that people will willingly talk about.
Well, yeah.
Which makes her boring.
Because we have depth in the fact that we do have polarities that we have to balance is what makes us human. And if you take away half of your polarities, well, yeah, you're, like, superficial and, like, shallow. It's not Beth's fault as a character that she was produced this way.
It's not Beth's fault.
Is what it is, and that kind of sucks for her, not really for us, because we got everything out of the story that we needed. The one person that we didn't really talk about as a character is Marmee. Marmee, for me, was all of the good things that you want to see in a traditional mom. She was always, like, super involved and very happy and supportive, and we don't get very much from her other than, you know, sometimes she will come into a scene and that makes the girls respond in one way, and then sometimes she's giving motherly advice, and then obviously she's there throughout all of the major life events. One of the standalone scenes with Marmee really stuck out to me because it was the only scene that I saw that had a person of color in it.
Really?
Yes!
We get one.
We get one.
In the movie.
We get a speaking one in the movie, actually. So, and it really, again, stuck out. Marmee obviously has to deal with being an army wife.
Yeah.
An army wife during the Civil War. I was not an army wife during the Civil War. I was an army wife much later than that, and it was not easy, and I don't really recommend it. For lots of reasons. Again, not going there right now. But Marmee kind of embraces this role, right?
Yeah.
Like, Dad's gone, he's doing his thing, I am matriarch, I'm taking care of these people.
Yeah.
I am also involved in my community, right? Like, they go and they help the Hummels, and they make sure that Grandpa's okay across the street. But she also works in organizing some kind of, like, supplies for people that are in need. And during this scene, Marmee basically says that, you know, she has spent her whole life ashamed of her country. And I thought that that was a very direct thing to say for this woman that is also very much doing her role.
Mm-hmm.
So she's very much showing up in the way that you would expect, but she's also very much disappointed in what she's seen her country go through.
Because the setting is based on, you know, is up against the backdrop of the Civil War.
Correct. So she's handing out these supplies from all of the, like, the war has just ended. She's helping people that have been adversely affected by this Civil War. And as she's handing out these supplies and she's making this statement about being disappointed in her country, there is a black woman and she's helping her with the supply distribution. And she says, you know, basically, no offense, but you still should be. And Marmee's like, yeah, I don't think I ever will not be. And so it was the most interesting thing to me that that is the only person of color that is actively speaking throughout this whole entire movie that's all about this white family that is, I mean, sure, they're not rolling in it, but
They're rolling in privilege, man.
They really are.
They're like so poor that their servants helps them take their Christmas dinner to the poor Hummels.
Yeah.
Like, wait, you guys have a servant?
Yeah.
Oh no,
right.
You poor, sad, poor people.
Yeah. So it's like they obviously have access to wealth, and I'm not saying that they've got a giant mansion with billions of servants, but they have enough that they are not concerned about their children dying. Mm-hmm. They're not concerned about not being able to marry wealthy, right? Because there's an access there too. Mm-hmm. Like you can't just be like, oh, you have to marry wealthy and then not be able to position your child to, you know, access that. So there's a plethora of privilege that these people have access to. So it was really nice in one regard to see that Marmee acknowledges that this is really messed up. It's also disappointing that that is the only conversation that happens about something that deserves so much more depth and dialogue.
Yeah.
It's nice that the hat tip to racism was there. It's nice that as a white woman, she was able to call out the fact that she's disappointed in her country in the Civil War era. But they didn't really do anything with it. And then they immediately switched. So it goes from Marmee acknowledging that, black lady being like, yeah, that makes sense, you should still do that, to Marmee interacting with a man who's lost his children to the war, a white man that's lost his children to the war. So it, like, immediately gives you this juxtaposition of, oh, well, it wasn't easy on anyone.
Okay. Yep. It's interesting that this book, set primarily during the Civil War, really doesn't mention race at all.
I don't think it's interesting. No.
No, I know. It's worth mentioning.
Yes.
It's not brought up in the book at all.
I think that it's interesting that in the book, it is very clear that father is a chaplain in the army, and then it doesn't address racism. Yeah. I like that connection right there, because it's very much made for Christians. Yeah. And yet, it didn't take that space to be able to address that in any capacity.
Yeah. I wonder at the pressure from the publishers, like I mentioned with Joe getting married,
Mm-hmm.
that felt very much like a thing that she had to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't imagine there was a whole lot of conversation that was accessible in 1868
No.
about race relations.
Definitely not. And in the movie, we get a really interesting, right at the beginning, picture of that in the publisher ripping apart Joe's article that she's there to pitch him. So you see directly from the start of the movie that her work is butchered
Mm-hmm.
to fit into their own, this is what's going on.
Right. This is what we'll
This
sell.
is what sells.
This is what we can sell.
This is what sells.
Yeah. This is what we can talk about.
And that also fuels the conflict that she has with Frederick, though, because she has to support her family. That's why she's in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So she's writing these things that he finds distasteful, or at least things that, you know, are not up to her ability.
You sold out.
Yes!
Yeah.
Yes, very much. Well, did I sell out, or am I just producing what they will purchase?
Because I literally...
Because I need to
need
eat.
the money. She's going for financial security and independence. That's...
You can't have both as a woman.
Yeah, and that's really, really softened in the book, which I think is interesting because Alcott achieved financial independence through her writing. I think that's brilliant.
I think that Alcott also had quite the privileged platform to begin with. I know that she definitely asserted financial independence on her own, but I also know that her father was wealthy and then lost a bunch of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that, again, her ability to access and have avenues to network with people
Mm-hmm.
with a better socioeconomic status was part of how she was able to achieve that financial freedom.
Yeah.
Again,
For sure.
Civil War era, and I don't really know that much about Louisa May Alcott, but I know that her family was progressive for the time, and that her dad's school was actually shut down because of his support for Frederick Douglass. So I thought that that was a really cool real-life thing that ended up kind of translating into the movie, especially at the end, where Jo is kind of standing in her power, and this is what I've been working towards, and she has the things,
Mm-hmm.
and one of those things being her school.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Oh, I did want to talk, when we were talking about representation, just a little bit about things that are like, this is because it was written when it was, but also things that we should mention. Eurocentric beauty standards and whiteness being an equivalent for beauty is Meg. It has beautiful white hands. It is expressed so many times throughout the book that she has beautiful white hands that every time it was like, bang my head against the wall. That's very much there. I just wanted to point that out because I think that if we don't point these things out, then we're just going to keep doing them. So,
I mean, yeah. I kind of said at the beginning that the whole movie was white person nonsense.
oh yeah, definitely. But again, if I feel like if I didn't call it out after banging my head against the wall, reading it so many times, if I didn't call it out at all, we're just, because we still do that.
We still do that. Not only do we still do that, but we still have a very idealized white beauty standard.
Yeah, that we apply to everyone. And
everyone.
It's a really big problem, guys. So there's that. I also want to mention briefly that when Meg was like learning how to cook because she was a new wife, everything that failed they gave to the Hummels because poor people aren't choosy. Like beggars can't be choosers kind of thing. So if she like burnt a roast, the Hummels could have it. Huh. Well, that sure is altruistic of you, Meg.
No, that is very privileged of you, Meg.
It is
how... That was not in the movie.
Yep. Well, no, of course. Just the same way that we don't talk about how beautiful Meg is because she's such a white person. It's like, it's not appropriate. We know that it's not appropriate. And I'm not saying that it was necessarily bad that Greta Gerwig and writers and everybody chose not to address it. But I do think it's important that as a society, we do address it.
Well, if we don't point this out and actually have the ability to look at it and be like, okay, well, first of all, but also what does that mean for me right now? Because I am taking in this information right now. And the part that I keep reminding myself and why I think that having these conversations is so important and can be so impactful is because everything that we take in, regardless of where it comes from, shifts our worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I am just accepting of the fact that Meg is the epitome of beauty in right now, which Meg, for those of you that don't know, in Greta Gerwig's adaptation is played by
Emma Watson.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to call her Hermione Granger, and that is not right.
Sorry, I
Don't
got
do
you.
that. But obviously, Emma Watson is beautiful. Like, we're not going to go there. What we see happen to Meg in the movie is that she has to deal with very superficial things as far as womanhood. We don't go into what that actually means for her. I don't get to see her inner situation at all. Like, there's no processing for it. So she very much shows up the way that you would expect her to look, and she very much does what you would expect her to do, and that's just kind of the whole entire thing. So you don't see that that is happening, but it is happening. So it's interesting to look at the words that were written, right? And how that message comes across in the written form versus what it looks like across the screen. So it's different because the actor that is actually portraying that person embodies all of those things, but you don't see the division of what that means.
That's the difference in media types.
Yes, absolutely.
If an author wants to express why someone is so beautiful, they have to be more explicit. They can't just hire someone who fits their standards of beauty.
Exactly. But it's Hollywood, so all of the standards of beauty are narrow and superficial. That's why I think it's funny that part of the praise that Gerwig got, or this adaptation got, is that she didn't make Frederick ugly. Well, it's Hollywood. Of course she didn't make Frederick ugly. If she would have, that would have been something to actually, like, praise and dig into. But no, like, he's young and hot. I don't know. That's very much
good. That's
Hollywood.
Better. I still think that Frederick being old and unattractive was Alcott flipping the bird to her publishing company. I don't know that that's true, but I hold that in my heart and I like it. It makes me really happy. Like, oh yeah, she needs to be either married or dead. Yeah. All right. She's going to marry a grumpy old bear. Actually, he was a charming, sweet old bear, but he was not attractive.
But we know for sure that she was under that pressure from the publishing company, and we know for sure that because it is Civil War era, that's just going to be part of the storyline. That's all that women were considered good for.
Yeah.
Up until really recently. I don't know.
Oy. All right. So, overall, would you recommend it?
So, overall, I would say that this is probably a movie that I would recommend for a feel-good, sisterly story that is about just family and becoming yourself. I think that overall, it's not a bad movie.
All right. Well, that is lukewarm, but I'll take it. I'm probably going to go see it, mostly because the last movie that I saw in theaters was the most recent Star Wars movie, and I need a palate cleanser.
Okay.
So that sounds nice. I'm going to go see it. I don't know that I would really recommend the book either. It's, I think that it's an interesting juxtaposition. The farther I get away from the text, the more I actually do appreciate the sort of overarching view of these girls growing up in the constraints of womanhood and what they do with it. So yeah, I like it. It's not bad.
Okay. I'm not going to read the book. Like, I'm just gonna straight up be
It's long.
open about that. Like, I have no desire to go there. Also, I would not spend money on going to the movie to see it. I don't know if that helps or hinders.
No, I mean, at some point it'll be on some streaming service and I will watch it.
Do that.
I will. And I think that I'll feel really happy about Joe's arc specifically. So
Exactly. There will definitely be warm fuzzies and also, like, lots of tears because Hollywood.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I can hang.
Woo!
Thanks for listening. You can join the conversation in our Facebook group. The page, facebook.com/realbooked, will direct you there.
If you want to support us and get more content, find us on Patreon. And you can always email us directly at realbooked@gmail.com. There will be links in the transcript.
All music in this episode provided by purple-planet.com.
Hope we hear from you soon.